All right. So we're going to just start things off today with some introductions. So first, I'm just going to go ahead and give a quick overview of Collective Impact Lincoln. So Collective Impact Lincoln, we got started in 2017 as a 3-year grant-funded project. We were funded through the Woods Charitable Foundation through their first Breakthrough Initiative grant. And we've finished up our first phase of the project, and now we're going into the second phase because we were able to receive 3 more years of funding, which is really great because we can't do all of this work in 3 years. So we're a partnership between Civic Nebraska, Nebraska Appleseed, and the South of Downtown Community Development Organization. And essentially, we work in 6 specific neighborhoods throughout Lincoln. The Appleseed organizers work in Belmont and Clinton. The South of Downtown organizers work in Near South and Everett. And our Civic Nebraska organizer works in Hartley and University Place. So we identified these 6 neighborhoods through the Lincoln Vital Signs report that was published in 2015. So these neighborhoods were just identified as some of the more vulnerable or disenfranchised neighborhoods throughout Lincoln. They're also some of our most historical and just like really vibrant and inclusive and diverse neighborhoods. So our organizers go door-to-door canvassing, not so much right now, pre-pandemic they did, talking to folks and just finding out, what do you like about your neighborhood? What do you wish was maybe different? What are some of the goals you have? And through that process, we identify neighborhood leaders, and we developed this community builder workshop as a platform to be able to bring some of those folks together to just expand on different skills and resources, to work on making those things at the neighborhood level just more long-term sustainable, and to be able to grow some of those things out together. So we focus on neighborhood projects, supporting different action committees, but we also do policy work. So we focus on, and really that's informed by the conversations that the organizers have with folks at their doors. And so housing was the one thing that we heard across all 6 neighborhoods. And so since 2018, roughly, we've been working on affordable and adequate housing. And so, you know, through that, we have worked on ordinances that have been passed at the city level. We do a little bit at the state level, which is what our focus is today. And we really just try to engage and empower residents to speak up about their experiences, what they've been going through with their housing situations, and to try to work together with the city to make some of those changes at the policy level. So it's really across the entire city of Lincoln and not just the 6 neighborhoods that we work in. So that's CIL in a nutshell. There's a lot more information on our website if you're interested in learning more. But what I'll do now is we'll just kind of go around the room and introduce ourselves. And if you just want to say your name, your pronouns, and maybe just a little bit about what organization or different communities that you feel connected with. And I can start, and then I'll just kind of call people out as I see them on my screen. So my name is Nancy. I go by the pronouns she, her, and hers. And I'm the director of Collective Impact Lincoln. I've been on the project since April of 2018. And so I feel connected with obviously all of the communities and neighborhoods that we work in, but also just, you know, more personally, I feel connected with my neighborhood, the Antelope Park area, 40th and A. And then also I serve on the board of an organization called Girl Power, which works to empower girls between grades 4 and 8 in some of Lincoln's neighborhoods and CLCs. So that's me. Let's start with Casey, and then we'll go to Cara.
Hi everyone, my name is Casey Ogle. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And I'm the staff attorney for Collective Impact Lincoln. So the communities I feel connected to, I think I'm kind of connected to the legal community, though maybe not as much as some other attorneys, and connected to some of the neighborhoods, that CIL works in as well. So.
Hi, everyone. I'm Cara Nelson, and she, her, hers. And I might be a little unique in that I just started recently working with Civic, Nebraska, but I am the coordinator for the Raymond Central School District before and after school program. So I'm actually, 10 miles north of Lincoln. So although Lincoln is, our go-to spot, that Raymond Central is kind of our home. So.
Great, thanks for joining us today, Cara. We'll go to Nora and then Vic.
Hi everyone, I'm Nora. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a community organizer with Collective Impact Lincoln at Nebraska Appleseed. So connected with the Belmont and Clinton neighborhoods through that.
Hello, everyone. I'm Vic. I am a community organizer with Collective Impact Lincoln at Nebraska Appleseed. And in addition to the neighborhoods of Belmont and Clinton that I feel very connected to via work, my pronouns are he, him, his. I also feel connected to the communities, the LGBTQ plus community here in Lincoln, as well as the Jewish community personally. So.
Ryan and then Kat. You're on mute, Ryan.
I always do that. My name's Ryan. I use he, him, his pronouns. I guess communities I'm involved in. I work at the University of Nebraska. I'm also a former board member with Nebraska and connected with the LGBTQ plus community. I currently live in Omaha, but I've lived in the near South in Lincoln for most of my adult life. And then I'm kind of attached to Beaver Crossing, Nebraska, because it's where I grew up. So.
I'm Kat. I am an organizer with South of Downtown Community Development. We're going to be doing session 4 with Isabel, and I'm connected to my neighborhood community in Everett. I'm also an artist, so I'm actually doodling right now, so that's why I'm like looking down. I'm still listening. I'm a great listener when I'm drawing, but so I feel very connected to the arts community here, and yeah, just like the organizing and activism community as well. Oh, my pronouns are she, her, hers, which I put in my name.
Perfect. Thanks, Kat. We'll go to Allie and then Rachel.
Hi, my name is Allie. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm an intern with the South of Downtown Community Development Organization, so I've just gotten to fall in love with the Everett and near South neighborhoods. Also a new resident of University Place, and I'm excited to get connected there. Thank you for having me here.
Hi, I'm Rachel. I am the law clerk with Collective Impact Lincoln with Nebraska Appleseed. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And I feel connected with the law school community at University of Nebraska, as well as the music community is something that I've been active in. Those are kind of the main ones, as well as just some like general activist community organizer communities. And then you do want to introduce yourself? I've got a wild 3-year-old hanging with me today. Do you want to introduce yourself, Lynn? You've been saying you want to talk to everybody. Okay, you're shy.
Thanks, Rachel. We'll go to Devin and then Ala.
Hi everyone, my name is Devin. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm connected to the artist community, and I volunteer with the South of Downtown, and I just recently moved to the Witherby neighborhood.
Hi everyone, my name is Ola Ismail and I'm a student I'm going to be a junior next year at Lincoln High School, and I feel connected to my school community, and my pronouns are she, her, hers.
Great. Bob and then Laura.
Hi, my name is Bob Wiley. I guess I don't know. I've lived back in Lincoln for a couple months. I can actually see the Capitol, so I don't know if that's south of downtown I actually, it's a little different, but I have a connection with the prisoner community. So the community of the incarcerated men and women in Nebraska. This is my first meeting, and I'm excited, so I'm glad to be here. So, oh, him, his, he, him, his.
Hi, my name is Laura Curry, and I identify with she, her, hers pronouns. I am probably most connected to the recovery community in Lincoln. And I currently live way southeast, but have lived in several of the neighborhoods that are part of this group. I have a college senior who's currently living in the south of downtown neighborhood and lived in the Hartley and Everett area and Clinton area last year. And I had the privilege of working at Lincoln Action Program way back in the olden days in 2004 with Sean Reba, and did some project impact work in some of those neighborhoods. So I'm really excited to do some work with the South of Downtown group. So thanks for having me.
Laura, what community did you say? I didn't hear the word you said.
Oh, recovery community. So, alcohol and drug addiction is kind of where I'm at right now. I'm a recovering alcoholic and drug addict. So, and then crossover, like Bob Wiley said, also into some of the prison systems also. So I'm interested in getting involved in that too.
Great, thank you so much. So Lenny wants to introduce herself now, so we're gonna go to her and then Isabel after that.
You ready? Do you want to tell everyone your name? Okay, it's your turn. Remember how you were sad that you missed your turn? If you want to introduce yourself, you can, but this will be your last chance, okay? Okay, it's done. Sorry, y'all.
That's okay. When she's ready, you can just jump in. Isabel?
Yeah, hi, my name is Isabel. I'm organizer at South of Downtown, so I work with Kat and everyone else. And I really feel connected to our neighborhood community, just because doing a lot of that walking in the neighborhood, like you see the same people over and over again, and then pretty soon you're kind of like friends and you kind of know like what they like to do when they hang out outside or something. So I feel connected to that community. I also feel connected to the LGBT community, like Vic, and then I also feel connected to like our little like Advocacy millennial community where I see the same folks kind of going to the protests and providing medical aid and stuff like that. So yeah, lots of compassion and kindness in our community that I'm happy and lucky to feel connected to.
Awesome, thanks Isabel. Karina and then Seth.
Hi, I'm Karina McCormick. My pronouns are she, her. I asked Nancy a while ago if you do one of these panels for the legislature. I'd like to be on the panel, so I'm excited about that. I live just south of the Capitol, so I feel really connected to that neighborhood. First with work we did with We Are Vital, and now I'm on the South of Downtown CDO board. Other communities that I feel connected to are the LGBTQ community, and I think I've actually been doing stuff with Ryan, like related tangentially to that activism since maybe 2002. I was just thinking about that. So, but yeah, also I feel a really strong kinship with all the people that go to city council and legislature regularly because it's a very special kind of.
Seth, we're just kind of going around and introducing ourselves. If you wanna quick do that.
Yes. Can you all hear me? Awesome. Well, I was having some trouble getting on, but yes, my name is Seth, and I am originally from South Sudan. I grew up 6 years of my life in a refugee camp. I'm also impressed by just meeting everybody over Zoom. I'm really impressed by the work that Civic Nebraska is doing, and really today, one thing that I'm so passionate about is, especially the immigrant community, the refugee community, because I'm part of them. And yep, so in a nutshell, I'm also one of the co-founders for Midwestern African Art Museum. We are cultural and resource center. So folks who love art, I am passionate about art. Yep, so that's me.
Thank you, Seth. Joshua, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Joshua Mueller. I'm a graduate student at the University of Nebraska. And right now that's the community that I would say that I'm most involved with, is just the graduate and student community there.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone, for doing that. So just to give you kind of a preview of today's workshop, we're going to start things off with a little panel discussion. Karina and Seth have agreed to answer some questions about testifying at the state legislature. So we're going to hear their perspective and kind of about their experience doing that. And I'll be moderating that conversation. But we're going to definitely have time for some questions from you all. I don't want to use the whole 30 minutes or whatever to just the questions that I've put together. So if you have questions that you think of during the conversation, put them in the chat, or you can wait until we kind of get to that point, and you can unmute and ask Karina or Seth, or if anyone else has anything that they want to share about their experience. This is a really open conversation around that. And then we'll take a break at around 11 o'clock for about 10 minutes or so, depending on timing. And then we'll kind of get into the last two sessions, and we'll wrap up around noon today. So I am going to share my screen really quickly. Oh my gosh, I have so many things open. There we go. All right, we already did all of that. So these are the questions that I put together. And like I said, we'll have some time to have everyone from the group ask any questions that, that might come up. So Karina and Seth, again, thank you so much for agreeing to kind of be on our panel and share your experience of being at this, testifying at the state legislature. So since session is reconvening on Monday, we kind of thought this was an appropriate time to have this conversation. And while this is not a typical session by any means, we at least wanted to give everyone kind of a sense of what it looks like and feels like to be able to experience that, testifying in front of any of the hearing committees. And we want to encourage that process. So we want people to feel comfortable doing it, and kind of like once you get that first one under your belt, it becomes a little bit easier. But there are other means of communicating with our state senators. So we'll talk about that later. So Karina and Seth, the first question I have here is what motivated you to testify at the legislature? Maybe the first time that you took that step.
I think the fact that we can motivated me. I just love it. It's so easy in Nebraska to do it. And I really want to take advantage of that and get my friends and people I don't know who care about this I do to also realize how easy it is to take advantage of that.
Yeah, if you all can hear me, really what motivated me was knowing that, yes, I'm one individual, but I'm, you know, representing thousands and thousands of others. And the first time I was asked or requested to do it, you know, I took it on, but then I looked into what we were testifying about. And again, really what did it for me was realizing that, you know, if I did not do it, you know, a lot other folks were going, you know, to suffer the consequences of it. So really what motivated me is just realizing that I was representing a large group that needed their voice to be heard.
Great, thank you for answering that question. So were there any barriers or issues that you came across when you were kind of getting ready for the, you know, and maybe not even the first time that you testified, but any instance where you went to the legislature to testify? What were some of the things that you ran into that you were able to kind of recognize that, well, this might be an issue for other folks?
The biggest issues I've had are that the legislature moves so fast that usually you don't really quite understand when it's happening until like the day before. Or, I mean, just by the time it trickles down to you, unless you from the very beginning of the session have been tracking bills. So this session, I've been trying to do that more, where I know what bills I care about and I actually keep watching them and plan ahead. Based on the information on the website, which is really useful. The other bigger issue that I had was, at first I assumed that the order of the bills that are announced or that are listed in the, on the website does not represent the order that they might be hearing them at the committee. And that actually caused a huge problem for me once. And maybe I'll share the link. It ended up being funny because I had to race back, like literally breathless, at like to get there at the right time after I'd set aside a separate time when I assumed it would be. So I've overcome that barrier by knowing that you can write to the aide the day before of the senator who's the chair, and the aide will send you the hearing schedule, which is different than the list of the bills online. And that was so non-intuitive for me.
Yeah, thanks, Corina. For me personally, the first barrier that I encountered was, I do want to say is inwardly being, you know, first of all, you're nervous, you know, that you're actually going to testify in front of state senators. And that by itself, it's a big deal. The other thing that, these were just my personal barrier before I talk about the other ones. It's the other part is I thought, hey, you know, am I putting myself out there? You know, what are some other things that, you know, testifying in front of state senators? Because think about it this way, it's in Africa, you know, we don't get opportunities to testify in front of senators, and state senators or state folks who do legislative work. It's not that easy to go in and see them. And not only that, sometimes a lot of them, you know, back in Africa, how we know them is they're heavily guarded. So I had, you know, those two things in mind, that, hey, these are some folks who actually represent, you know, the government and so forth. So I had that fear of, who am I gonna see, who's there? So I also had a fear personally, which is me growing up in Africa, growing up in a refugee camp, of there's that fear of, you know, as a representative that you might encounter. So, but then another barrier that I had is, it was my first time, you know, of doing something like this. So I really did not know the whole outcome of how things were gonna go. But the most important one that I had to overcome was my own personal fear, you know, and look at it that, again, that I'm not doing it for myself. But when you talk about some barriers that I encountered, but I also received a lot of support. I received a lot of support from Nebraska Appleseed, where they had, their staff that are well trained on how to help us go through the process. But one thing it was hard to do was to overcome my inward fear. So that my main barrier that I had to overcome was just my personal feelings. I had to put those aside and then look into the issue itself, and then I think it helped the process become easier.
Those are two really great perspectives. So thank you both for sharing that. And I think it speaks a lot to, I know in Nebraska and in Lincoln especially, we do have this really accessible way of speaking with our elected officials. But even with that, there are still some of these barriers that, maybe aren't considered for a lot of folks. So it's helpful to just talk to each other about those things and maybe try to find ways that we can overcome them together and just share this information out. So maybe it's not as daunting to be able to go there and share those really important views and perspectives that you all have. So based on that, what were some of the resources you were able to utilize? I know, Karina, you mentioned that you found out, you could email the legislative aid and then maybe get a more detailed or accurate list of when the bills were going to be heard at the testimony itself. But were there some other ways that you were able to kind of reach out or talk with folks to utilize some things that just helped you better understand the process and what that looks like?
Yeah, surprisingly, seeing Red Nebraska has been one of the best resources for me because, when you just look at the calendar of bills, it doesn't necessarily tell you from the heading, like how serious the bill is, like if it would be really, really great if it passed or really, really horrible if it passed, or if it's just some trivial thing where they're changing one word in the bill. Things like Civic Nebraska have been good. I'm at the point now where I try to be a resource for people now that I have worked through what the bills are. Like, I didn't know at first you had to write, if you did written testimony, that you had to write, I want this in the written record as my testimony, which is huge, but like, how are you supposed to know that? So like that sort of thing. I've told so many people that you have to write, I want this in my, in the record as my testimony. But yeah, there's a lot of groups in Lincoln, but I think honestly, like people have so many different passions and also availabilities during the day that I think I really encourage people to look at the calendar at the beginning of the session and figure out what bills you care about and track those bills so that every person can become a resource on that bill and like be letting their friends know, hey, you have until this day at 5 p.m., which is the day before the committee hearing, to submit the letter to the committee chair, which is this person, and that can be really effective, I think. I'm gonna share in chat for you to watch later the hilarious time that I didn't know when the bill I wanted to testify was going to be, but I did it anyway. So I'm pretty proud of this one because it was like so embarrassing to be rushing in, and taking layers and layers of clothes off like as I was walking like through the Warner chamber. But I still did a good testimony. So that's one of the ones I'm most proud of because I overcame that obstacle.
Yeah, thanks, Karina. The resources that I utilized to help me overcome some of the issues that I had was the organizations that are here, like, knowing that Civic Nebraska is here. Other organization, like I also mentioned that I utilized was Nebraska Appleseed. It did influence, my testimony at the end because you feel like there's a support, and also reading through the material, not just going there and just testifying, but familiarizing myself with what was at hand, what was going to be asked. That did help. And I think also Karina kind of just brought up a couple of things. I mean, I'm just going to back up a couple of things as she said. Those also were what for me, there were resources, that I was able to use. But one important resource that I think that I used was, saying, hey, I'm going to go ahead and do this even without knowing how it's all done. So I really might not say that everything that I might have needed was there, but just being able to just motivate myself using, to go ahead and test. Then also kind of try beforehand, maybe, like I said, reading through what you're going to talk about and making sure also that, how these things go, they are pretty timed, and there's a certain of time that you have, to stand there and give your testimony. So what I had to make sure is I had to keep time. As an African, sometimes time is, we get, coming from where I come from, if it's at 10, you can get there at 11 if you want to, but this is not at the state legislature. It's like, it's 10 minutes, it's 10 minutes, it's 5 minutes, it's 5 minutes. So I had to kind of self-discipline myself and limit how much stuff I'm going to say. And if there was anything that was not important, or maybe were not going to be impactful with what I wanted to talk about, I got rid of those, even though there was a lot that you want to talk about. So really, not only that, but also realizing that you have a passion for what you want to go testify about. I think it's based on how passionate you are, or how does whatever you want to testify about, how much is that going to influence, like I said, the many people that I was representing. So, but apart from that is having these organizations like Civic Nebraska, Nebraska Appleseed, or maybe just even your friends, if I had some friends who maybe had testified before, talking to them and asking them how the process went. So I also used, personal friends and personal peers to help me with that process.
I just want to jump in here really quick. I think that those are really great points, and that's a lot of the ways that I try to be a resource for people. It's just simply that hype crew of you're going to do great. You're the expert on this. Your passion and your lived experience is all of the expertise that you need, regardless of who has data or facts. If you have expertise in academic or your life experience, those are both equally valuable. And a lot of the times that's what the senators want to hear. They just want to hear about you and your perspective, because you are their constituency. You're the folks that they want to hear from. And then also on being a resource for other people, I've also had the chance to be able to make time in my day to read testimony that other people are writing if they can't be there. So I'm hey, I'm Isabel, I'm going to read you something that this person did, that this person really wanted you to hear. And even that, speaking someone else's words into the record, if they don't have that opportunity, I think that's also super powerful.
Thanks, Isabel. Yeah, that's a great point. And, I will say that for anyone who is new to testifying at the legislature or just hasn't quite found that groove yet, Collective Impact Lincoln, we're here to help you with all of these things. So whether that's helping you shape that testimony or just read over something or kind of do that back and forth, if you want to test the timing of it, or, if it's hard to narrow it down to just, 5 minutes or whatever, what are some of the more powerful things that you can share in that testimony that's really going to hit home for those senators during that hearing? So we're happy to talk through any of those different areas with you and kind of find what works best. And also, to the point where you feel comfortable, where you've done it enough that you feel, okay, I'm ready to do this. I'm ready to take that next step and actually go ahead and testify in person. So we're here for all of those different needs that you might have. So, Karina and Seth, you've both shared a lot of really wonderful information and kind of, I think, given a couple different perspectives on what it's looked like for both of you when testifying. what other just sort of little pieces of advice or tips might you have for anyone who is new to this process, or maybe who has done it a few times but really wants to be able to hone those skills a little bit better and just make the biggest impact in that short amount of time that you have the floor?
So yeah, I think a first step, even before testifying, is deciding which bills are best for you to go in person and which you can just submit a letter. If it's more just like you want the committee to see that people support or oppose a bill and why, the letter might be sufficient. But if it's something you really, really care about, or you have a unique experience with, or you've seen a lot of different people's experiences with it, or you have expertise in it, I would really recommend going in person. And as you're testifying, remember you're not talking about the issue in general, you're talking about the bill, the words that are in this bill. So make sure you know exactly what this bill in particular does, not just what it's about. They really appreciate that. I've had multiple people, like most of the time I testify, senators do thank me for keeping it tied to the bill and honing in on the topic. One thing in Nebraska you have to keep in mind, which is like sort of odd to think about, you don't just have to convince them that the issue is important, you have to convince them that the state is the right level of authority to be making this issue, because a lot of times the reason something doesn't get passed in Nebraska is because the senators think it should just be done at the local level. I think the first time that I testified was about having state funds for neighborhood revitalization. And I came up with a rationale for why the state needed to come in and make up the difference for equity. And I was actually one of the only people who addressed that. And several senators thanked me for making that particular argument. And I had just kind of come up with it on the spot as I listened to other people. Let's see. Talk to the senators that are on the committee, and sometimes maybe make your case a little more compelling to them. Like there was one case where I said you shouldn't do this bill because the state will get sued. This is a lawsuit waiting to happen. They've even written this into the bill that the state will help that state will cover the legal costs if they do get sued. I pointed out things like that. It was the one for putting in God We Trust in schoolhouses. And everybody else testified like this is horrible, there's separation of church and state. But I came in and talked about the boring stuff. And I even said, I'm going to talk about the boring stuff. And they again thanked me for like keeping it to the details of it. And I don't know, it feels really great to have like the senators being like, wow, that was a really good testimony and I really appreciate you being here. I don't usually write out the words. I just decide what points I want to talk about. I know some people feel better for writing out the words. Sorry, I thought about a lot of things. If you submit a letter as a group and it's clearly submitted as a group, you can still testify about as yourself in person. I've done that before too, where I got a lot of the bigger issues in the letter for our group for Renters Together. But at the day of the testimony, I shared my personal experience and I made sure to delineate it. And I think even the addition of my personal experience to the bigger issues with the experts, that was helpful. Because like I'm a very reasonable seeming person. And if I have this problem, imagine who else has this problem. So sorry, and then I will turn it over to Seth and feel free to ask during the Q&A.
Thanks, Karina. I think Karina also brought it up. It's familiarize yourself with that bill itself, and know what it is about. And again, I really will say that is also, my advice to everyone is know exactly what the bill is about, and also what are the repercussions of not standing up and testifying for me personally, the advice that I would have for individuals who are interested in testifying is, my question to them is, does this really matter to you? And if it matters to you, how much does it matter to you? And I'll talk a little bit about the story of what I testified about. What we testified about is there was a senator who introduced a bill. And the bill that he introduced was, he wanted all the immigrants, all the refugee community to be put in a database where all their information, everything they've ever received, you're talking about like if it's food stamp, if it's Medicaid, all that number to be put in a database where anyone and everyone can go ahead and access that information. And again, that is something that affected not only me, but it affected, I'm going to talk about hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of other refugees in Nebraska. And the reason why I'm advising anyone who's interested in testifying to know it is on whatever you're going to testify, like it's actually happening to you. Don't just look at it like it's happening to all these other folks, so it doesn't involve me and I don't care. And some folks that, while we were testifying on the other side, were actually for this bill. And there's some things that, I heard, while we were testifying that still I think about every single day till today. This was not just something that, a bill that made me, made me feel good. It actually I was actually sad hearing that an individual came up with this kind of a bill. It was a bill that was only discriminating against immigrants and against the refugee community. And while I was testifying, remember that I was really, really scared to testify. Then it also brought memories of things that, that I've personally gone through, and there's some of the reasons why we're here in America. But I was also surprised that there was actually folks on the other side that supported, this kind of bill, this kind of practices. And when I heard them speak, everything that I had them say, it was like they were talking to me, when they were talking about, that immigrants are not good, refugees are not good. It was like they were making it look like it was all towards me as an individual. So what I'm saying is, don't be, yes, try and overcome your fears, but if you're interested in testifying, own what you're going to testify about. Be passionate about it, and realize that, like Karina said, it's just you as an individual, you're able to influence a whole other individuals, other citizens, just like yourself. So really, my advice to you is, yes, you might be scared like I was, you might not be well in articulating how you're gonna speak. But I think if you own up what you're going to testify about, I think you're really going to overcome a lot of barriers. So just own up to what you're testifying. And again, like we all mentioned, look into all the other resources that are around you, because it's really what impressed me about Nebraska and about the US is, some things that you believe you're not just you. There's many, many other folks who stand right beside you. You just happen to be the one who has the mic in front of you. So seeing that support, seeing the community, seeing, like Civic Nebraska, Nebraska Advocacy, these other organizations are just there standing up for us. It's amazing. So for me, like, I feel like tearing up a little bit because, there's so many situations, so many experiences that we go through. Some are actually discriminative against just a certain group, a certain gender, but just realizing that you're not alone, that there's a lot other people who can actually stand with you and are actually there to fight for you, for your right. And some of the things that all these other folks are fighting for will never influence them. Like I was speaking about refugees and immigrants. There were folks there that are not refugees and immigrants that were standing for refugees and immigrants. And really that makes me personally be able to sleep at night, that it's not just, you're not alone in this. So whenever my advice to anyone who wants to testify is just go ahead and overcome, do it afraid. It's kind of like do it even though you are scared, just go ahead and do it. So really that's extremely why I even agreed to talk today, is because I know that this is an important thing. You know, testifying in front of legislature is extremely important. So also take it as an important thing. You know, take it as a citizen. It's like, you know, somebody who's going to the military or going to fight for their country. So look at it as not just you, but look at it as you actually fighting for what's right.
I want to say something related. Yeah, sorry, that was great. Thanks. I want to say something related to what Seth said. When you're there in the legislature, whether or not you're testifying or just there to observe, sometimes you do have to mentally and emotionally prepare yourself for the people on the other side. So the bill that I sent you the link for was about the gay panic defense, which is that in court, if you've attacked someone, you can say like, oh, well, I did it because they were gay and they were hitting on me. And that can be your reason to get found not guilty. Or like, oh yeah, I took this person home and then it turns out that it was a man that I thought was a woman. Obviously, that's not my words, I'm quoting someone else. You know, like I should be allowed to like kill them because of that. And that's the only reason to support, like to oppose this bill. But there were still people there saying stuff like that. You know what I mean? And so that's really hard. And so I think the stronger we can make our voices on the other side, like for fairness and for equity, I think it's better to like water down those other sides, but you will be hearing them. And so, yeah, this bill that I sent you the link for, luckily there were lots of people supporting the bill and giving really powerful testimony about this. I can't remember which of you were there that day, but I know some of you were.
Thank you so much, Karina and Seth. And Seth, I think you had a really, really powerful message, and I appreciate both of you sharing those stories and experiences. And you're right, you do have to prepare yourselves mentally for, you know, the other side that is opposite of what you're there to say on a bill. And just know that there are a lot of other people there with you, whether you know them personally or not. And so there's a whole community of folks that are there just sort of, you know, mentally, spiritually, and physically there to support the same things. And so you can reach out to a lot of people and find that comfort. But it's a really big step, and it's a big deal to do that and to speak out and to share your personal story or the stories of those that are around you and you've seen how it affects them. So we've got a few minutes here for questions from participants, and you know, these can be general, these can be directed to Karina and Seth, or just to anyone who's had experience testifying. So feel free to unmute and ask your question, or throw it in the chat and we can talk about it.
Where do you guys, so I have testified in front of state senators for just like recently for it was like a racial equity commission that Isabel dragged me to, and I was really grateful for her for doing that. But I'm always curious, like, where do people find the information on the bills, or I know a lot of people will like go on the website, on the like state website or whatever, and look through those bills. But like Karina said, a lot of times reading the title, like you don't know if they changed like a word or if there's like a major addition. And so like, where can people find resources that sort of summarize what's happening or things that we actually like care about, rather than like and versus or kind of situations?
I've been hearing about it from different groups that I follow, you know, so like out in Nebraska, for example, will promote the LGBTQ issues, and you know, the housing email list that we have will obviously like send the bills about housing. But I think if you're involved with a group, you should also try to get your group to promote those bills, because not all the groups do. And a lot of times they only post it like the day you need to write letters because they've just found out about it. So, I mean, honestly, this is not really wanted advice necessarily, but I would say like set aside a day at the beginning of session, like with not just your phone, but like an actual laptop, and go through the bills, because there might be some really niche thing that like turns out to be the thing you're the most passionate about in the world, and there isn't even like another group doing it. And then you become the person that gets people to notice that bill.
And if that sort of, because I think, yeah, the two pieces of seeking out aligned groups that have some of the more resources and time to keep track of that, but then taking, because there's obviously a lot of information that a group can put out too, but setting aside that time to kind of parse through and figure out what it is. So we all have limited capacities too, but if that sort of thing is something that interests folks, building power with other people and doing that together, whether virtually or in person, is also another thing that's part of it. You know, getting people to show up isn't just walking with them up the stairs, you know, up to the Capitol. It is also, like Karina's talking about, those kind of like research sessions at the beginning of the legislative session. And it can be really encouraging, as well as make it a little less daunting to do that with just one other person. And then you can ask, what does this legal jargon mean? What does that even mean? And then you can work through that together. I know that's been helpful for me too.
And Devin asked a question, but let me say first, there's also the step of it gets assigned to a committee and then that committee schedules it. So if you can at least watch and see what committee it gets assigned to, then it makes it like a little bit easier for you to watch. It really has to be a process, especially if you're going to get it done in time to get other people to submit letters. Devin asked a question. Seth, why don't you answer that? I think you have a better experience about that one. Did you see Devin's chat?
Okay, Devin, what was your question?
I basically just want to know a little bit more about anyone's personal experience that like has like testified about like just like the mental and the emotional preparedness that Karina mentioned and others have mentioned now too, of just being ready to hear things, maybe, yeah, just that.
Well, I think that's a good question, David. You know, there is that part of it that maybe if it can help you, which I think helped me out quite a bit, is, you know, living in the U.S., these are some rights that you as American, as citizens have that other countries do not have, you know. If you take it and look at it that way, you know, you're actually getting to express things in ways that maybe many other countries, they're not allowed to do it that way. Or maybe, and some might face repercussions later, and sometimes it might include their life. In America, it's a little bit different. In America, is what I realized, it's more of a personal fear. One thing that, going back to David, is how do you prepare yourself emotionally, and then later, how do we overcome those experiences, especially if they were particularly, you testified about something that you strongly believe in. I personally, what has really helped me is talking to others after testifying, you know, or finding some support of folks who probably believed in the same thing that you're talking about. You know, I've had many opportunities where I've talked about this subject that we testified about, you know, to my other fellow friends, my other fellow refugee community. And every time when they hear it, there's that awe of this, there's a disbelief that, oh, wow. And then there is that awe again of feeling that, you know, that you testifying is actually something that is appreciated, because really, you might not see it this way, but you're actually helping some folks who might not help themselves. It's like you have this opportunity in your hand of just raising your voice and making sure that it's being heard, or trying to get your voice to be heard so that other people's voices can be heard. The right thing for me to say is, one thing that I've had to overcome is, hey, is anything else going to happen after me testifying? Okay, the folks who heard me testifying, that they didn't like what I said, are they going to try and find other ways, to find different ways to retaliate? You have to overcome all that. And that's what I overcame. And sometimes I wonder, sometimes you sit to yourself and you wonder that, hey, the other side didn't like what I said, what are they saying? But I had to overcome that, because I realized that, hey, I'm not just speaking for myself, this is not just me who's speaking. I'm speaking on behalf of others. And if I have to face certain, retaliation or certain things later, it's okay, because I think I've done something right, even though it might not feel right later to some folks. I feel great about after testifying, but some folks might still even be more nervous later after testifying, because they're like, okay, I just spoke to state senators, I just spoke to folks, or sometimes even what you're saying is being heard, being recorded, and you might face some backlash, but don't look at the bigger picture, and see if which one outweighs which. Is your personal feelings or your personal fears, does it outweigh what you just spoke about? So I think that's a really good question, Davin. And even for me myself, every single day I think about what I testified about, and but I still feel happy that what we testified, after we testified, that bill was not passed. So I can sit back and relax and know that, hey, at least I did something right. So it's just about doing what's right. Thanks for asking that question.
I like that point about, mentally preparing yourself for like, wow, we got 100 people to testify and it still didn't pass. That I think is like actually the hardest part. But mentally and emotionally, you have to be able to have the right balance of calm and passion. You need to appear as a reasonable person who also cares about this. Like it doesn't work if you're just like reading monotone. There's no point. You may as well just submit a letter. But I mean, you don't want them to call you hysterical, famously, and then you make your license plate hysterical, as one testifier did, because you want them to pay attention. So I think that's like an odd balance. You're not yelling at them. It's not a protest, but let your passion come across. Also, and then there's the testimony part, but also there's the question part. And sometimes they ask really weird questions and you're like, excuse me? But you have to be like, like with the In God We Trust bill, it went on for like 3 hours and it turned into like this question of whether or not God exists. And you don't really know what to do. We know some of our senators aren't always reasonable. So like also get in your head, like, okay, the question that they might ask me might be like way out there. And I need to stay like in character basically to answer it. Some of those questions that were asked in the In God We Trust bill, I don't think there's any way that people could have prepared for how out there they were. So.
I think that's a really good point, Karina. At any point, if they're asking you questions, you can say, I don't know. Instead of like they're trying, especially if they're being a little bit aggressive and trying to pigeonhole you into like saying something that kind of counteracts your argument, you can just say, I don't know, or I don't have the answers, and that's okay. And then I think Karina was talking about this a little bit about like being a reasonable person. A lot of the times it's worked out in our favor to have some of those really, especially around housing, those really aggressive folks come out in opposition to things that should just be like common sense and human dignity and like compassion. And they just kind of like counteract against their argument. They're just coming at it and they're yelling at the senators, and that works against them because that makes them feel that makes them appear to be the unreasonable ones. And if you're coming at it from a stance of like, this is my truth, this is what I want to say, not going to attack you guys, and just approach it in a way that's like very conversational and not like you're already on the defensive or already ready to lash out, that will do so much for your argument, and they'll remember how the things that you said and not your anger or the things in which you said it. And then the last thing I want to say, Devin, about like your what does the like emotional prep look like for you? For me, it really helps to have folks in like a group chat and say like, hey guys, I'm going to testify. And like, if anyone's there in person, or if they're just watching at home, or if they're just like, okay, cool, like keep us posted. It's really good to just like get out those things in the moment and like go back to your chair and be like, did you hear what that guy said? Or like, if you're listening to the opposition's arguments about something that's stupid that they said, and you're like, like it really helps to have that hype crew with you of like, you said your piece, and also like, what the heck just happened? I think that's really important to have like your little support group, and help you get out some of those things.
And Isabel, okay, I guess you're kind of wrapping up, but Isabel also mentioned like if they ask you questions, you can say you don't know. Joseph Couch, who later ran for legislature, his first testimony was at the In God We Trust bill, and they were asking him really wild things because he was an atheist. And he said like something along the lines of, I prefer to stick to the topic of the bill. I've written my email address on the testimony form, and you are welcome to contact me and we can talk about this later. And I thought I was really impressed by that.
Absolutely. Well, I want to make sure we have a few minutes for a break. So Seth and Karina, again, thank you so much for sharing your experiences. If anyone has any other questions, feel free to reach out, put them in the chat, and we can always follow up on that. So let's go ahead and we'll take about a 4 or 5 minute break, and we'll come back around 10 after, and Vic will do his session for us. So.
Any of you can write to me on like Facebook or whatever if you have more questions or whatever.
I think that, so I'm trying to, I always have trouble seeing everyone. But I, just for kicks and giggles, this was the song I was trying to play to call people back in. Which I feel like we can all benefit from. Actually, at the board and staff retreat yesterday for Appleseed, I put this as, this is my theme song of my life. So with that, we're gonna get started. Yeah, can you see my screen okay? Is it actually in present mode? Perfect, okay. So this session, and if we were in person, I would be standing and walking and very animated, because this is something I'm really passionate about, is both getting folks to the door, to the entry point of advocating to senators and to congressional on the federal level, but also we're talking about state senators. But then how you do it matters a lot. And it can, becoming that from that, you know, entry point to growing in confidence to feeling like I'm an expert in this. I think that process is really cool and exciting. So we're gonna talk about both senators in ways that are not in-person testimony, and then talking a little bit more about how to shape that testimony that you might share in person. So to start off with, who's your senator? There is a link here, and let me go back over here. Oops. I'm gonna be not incompetent for a second. Would actually, Nancy, would you drop the link to that page that I have linked on that slide? And that is the starting point to figure out who your senator is for literally your zip code, like the area that you live in. And it's pretty easy. And I'm gonna actually go here, and then so in order to do this, it's gonna be a little clunky, but we're gonna figure it out. So I wanna do this. Oh, you know what? So basically, once you plug in your information, and I'm gonna over here. So, sorry, I'm going to change which screen you can see. So here we are on the actual Nebraska Legislature website. And so this, you can kind of zoom in here, and here's the map of Nebraska. We're over here, down there. And you can do it that way. You can just also put in your zip code, and it'll tell you where you're at, who's your representative. So that is one thing to just figure out. But I'm gonna loop back to that because that's important, but it's not as important as it can be, or as maybe some people assume that it is, because you can actually talk to really any senator. So just making sure, can y'all see the PowerPoint again? Okay. So once you've identified who your senator is, that's your first step of kind of you're into the legislature. That person, you are their constituent. They have to listen to you. So then thinking about how the next question is kind of who needs to hear what you have to say. And so that's what I'm saying. Like, you are allowed to communicate with any senator. You are Nebraskan. They're a Nebraska senator. But then there's other things to consider. Who really needs to hear what you have to say? So some of the questions that you can choose to consider, because I want to emphasize saying anything is better than saying nothing. So if you're talking about a specific bill in a communication, a letter, an email, a phone call, if you're talking about a specific bill, does the senator already say on their website, which is on, once you find your senator or any senator, they have information on the legislature's website about bills they're introducing, stances they've taken, other important issues to them. Some senators keep up their webpage better than others or more robustly than others. It's a good starting place to kind of figure out who is the senator, what do they care about? And on that page, if you are talking about a specific bill, excuse me, you can find out if they've already voiced what their stance is on it, and that's a good starting place. You can also figure out if it is a specific bill that you're talking about, is it already assigned to a specific committee? Because then that will tell you if there is going to be a hearing at which you can testify, who that'll be, because each committee is made up of their own, between like 6 and 8, maybe 10. I don't remember exactly numbers, but each committee has their own character and personality. Judicial is very different than natural resources. And so that can also inform you, if it's already assigned to a committee, maybe you want to talk to the people who are on that committee via letters, phone calls, emails, because they will decide whether it moves forward to the general group and get some more momentum. Excuse me. If it's, and another note, some senators are more particular about only responding to constituents. All that also really kind of only matters if you're really concerned about getting a response to written communication too. Because again, you can talk to anyone. And then if it's not a bill, if it's more of a general kind of policy or an issue area, something that Karina was talking about earlier about being able to keep track of what's happening in the legislature is finding those aligned groups who have the resources and time to kind of keep track of different issue areas and what's happening in the legislature. So that you don't have to do all the work yourself, because it's daunting. It's a lot. I think this last legislative session before it ended for the pandemic had over, man, I can't even remember now, but I feel like over 200 definitely for sure bills introduced. Which is just so many. I'd be impressed if someone found that exact number. But it's a lot. It's too much for one person. And if they've already created policy solutions for this issue area, you can amplify those if you agree with them. You can also come up with your own, like Karina was saying on the spot. She identified something on the spot while testifying and senators found it interesting. Say what you want to. Say what you agree with. Don't feel like you need to co-opt what you are passionate about in order to amplify someone else. So The next question would be then, how do you want to contact them? Which is sometimes a little bit more complicated than what people might think. And it's not complicated in the avenue, because sending an email to senators is just the same as sending an email to your mom. If you email your mom, I don't know, my mom used to email me. And you just take the email address and you send it in. There's no like special key or anything. Same with a letter. You're still just sending it to their PO box. There you go. Phone call is a slightly, I mean, it's like calling an office. So noting almost all senators accept email, phone calls, and physical mail. There are just a couple exceptions about email, who just don't have email addresses. What medium you choose depends a little on what you're trying to say, but really any way is good. That's the important part. So something that you consider, mail, physical mail, postcards or letters can be delivered all together. And you can have a photo op opportunity if kind of amplifying people care is what is important right now in the like life cycle of this movement for whatever issue you're advocating. Phone calls are quick. You can do those on a lunch break. You can do those in 3 minutes. And they do get noted in a way. So if you call and an intern or an administrative aide answers, you can tell them what you are talking about. They will usually note that down under like an issue area, and that'll get kind of passed along within a couple days or a week. State is a little bit different than congressional. I have some congressional interning experience, and it's a bigger volume. So a little bit different, and then emails can include a lot more volume of information and links. If you're really wanting to kind of brief this person on the senator on like, this is what's going on, videos can be included in emails, just more, dynamic in regards to media. And those are a couple pictures of different kind of letter delivery things, including some CIL stuff. Then figuring out what it is that you want to say. This can be both the hardest and the easiest part. And here are some pretty, general guidelines. Personalized is always better than a form or template alone. I used to say, so with the experience that I had interning in a congressional senator's office, I used to say that if you wanted to get a response, you should tell them that your cousin is like stuck in an airport in New Delhi, or you have a flag request, so that there's an ask, because form templates just get filed really quick. And so even if you're just telling part of a story that is your story, that's going to be so much more impactful and will require more notice from the senators and from their staff. You don't need original policy ideas. Back to what I was saying about finding aligned groups. You can just be you, say what your experience has been walking through this life in this world, and that's enough. You have claim to their time as a constituent, as a Nebraskan, as a person. And then this last one is sometimes hard for us, and I have a meme, I believe, to make fun of myself in regards to this following. Try to focus on one issue per piece of communication. There's 2 reasons for this. One, it just helps you keep focused. And I love checking things off a to-do list. So if I'm like, I have these 4 issues that I want to talk to a senator about, I can boom, boom, boom. And then they're each a 2-minute phone call or a 2-minute email. And then I've already sent 4 or, communicated 4 times. But it also, the unfortunate truth is that if you put a few different issues into one piece of communication, it usually gets recorded or noted as only under one of those things. So part of your message is getting lost, and that's not fair to you. And also senators are busy. So even ones who are very much aligned with your stance might not be able to answer everything if you are looking for a response in one piece of return correspondence. And so this meme that I'm going to share is making fun of myself. I am the legislative intern mentioned in the meme. Legislative interns reading letters about how logging in northern Wisconsin is connected to condominium property taxes in California. That was a real letter for sure that I read, and that's one side of the complexity, but just trying to simplify down and send multiple instead of your message getting lost in one. Even if it is about logging in northern Wisconsin. I'm gonna do a quick chat because I'm going real fast. Ala, great question. And Isabel, you mentioned in regards to including evidence, data, facts. Yes, so, and that's something I'm gonna, when I'm talking about shaping testimony, even though, which is gonna be the next section, even though testimony is something we've just been talking about as being in person, some of the same kind of principles or best practices apply to written or phone call communication. Okay, so in regards to testimony, I want to take a second here and I'm going to stop sharing my screen. But first, I want you to think about a story you remember, any story, literally any, and think about what do you remember of that story and why do you remember it? And feel free to put things in the chat of dynamics or aspects of the story or reasons why you think you remember it. And feel free to unmute too. So there's emotional response. Bob mentioned, yep, comedic, embarrassing. You think about who told you the story. Do you care about that person? Are they interesting to you? Is it a story that you created yourself and it involves someone you care about? The reasons why people remember stories is really complex, and it's more than we need to parse through now, but there are some basic tenets of what we remember and why we remember it that absolutely apply when it comes to telling stories to senators, because senators are also human. They may be intimidating, but they are also human. And our goal is to get them to remember our story. And if that story includes data, also that part of it. So let me go back here. Okay. So I got to, Yep. So I got to sit in on a training for a listening session that Senator Michaela Cavanaugh had orchestrated this last week. There were 2 listening sessions, virtual. And I got to be just listen in on one of the trainings for that. It was just kind of prepping people, very similar to this, how to tell your story, how to talk to senators. But that was a little bit more COVID-19 related issues. And one of the people sharing, one of the people training, she has a journalism background, and she gave me a couple interesting things to chew on. And one of the ways I kind of synthesized, one of the points she was making is deciding whether it's testimony or an email or a letter, are you telling a story that's making an argument, or are you sharing an argument that includes a story? And both of those things are great. And like what Ala was asking about with, do you include data? That probably lends towards, you're probably taking more of an approach that you're making an argument and you're gonna include a story. If your priority is the data and the statistics. But that doesn't mean that, like Isabel was saying, that you can't include that in the story. You are all experts already in your own life and in who you are and how you've walked through this world. Really value that, honor that. And if your expertise in how you've walked through life is reflected and you feel is echoed or amplified by some statistics or data, absolutely throw that in. But don't ever dismiss yourself because you don't have numbers in your testimony or something. Definitely can add to that kind of read of you as a reasonable or credible person, but it is not it's not the backbone of it. Really kind of basic idea about testimony. Try to do 3 main points. Human brains kind of latch on to groups of 3 better. And if you are doing in-person testimony, it's good to repeat those. Make sure that you're being a little repetitive, because it's oral testimony, and so sometimes things get lost. And you submit copies of your testimony, so senators do have access to the writing, but they're busy, and you really want to hit it home when you have that face-to-face time. And the last thing that I had not thought about in such a concise way that this person shared with the journalism background was that our brains will automatically avoid a cliche. So if I were to say, I have been passionate about how to communicate with senators since time began, that it's just like, I like glaze over, even in my own mind. I'm like, that doesn't mean anything to me. And so trying to avoid the cliches and being really authentic about why this matters to you, what you genuinely think about it, that's going to keep people engaged through that 3 minutes or that 5 minutes. And also with written communication too. So we're getting close to the end, because I know I want to leave a little time for questions if I can. This is the question I can best pose for kind of how we move this forward. What is your advocacy going to look like? And because we're in the middle of a pandemic too, I fully 1,000% recognize that some actions are more doable for others than other folks, and that's important to recognize our own capacities and our own measures of safety. And a note that, so there is a legislative session starting on Monday. It is the conclusion of the session that was started earlier this year. There's 17 days. They aren't really changing. The speaker of the legislature has said he's not really changing any priorities, but that doesn't mean that we don't need to show up and speak, and not show up in the sense of going to the legislature, because what I'm pointing here is that there isn't an opportunity for in-person testifying during the 17-day session, mostly because of pandemic precautions, as well as the speaker just saying we aren't going to change anything in our priorities. But that doesn't mean that there aren't ways to engage. And that's something that Isabel and Kat are going to talk about. So we'll segue into that in just a couple of minutes. But then there will be another legislative session that starts in January. And we get kind of a cool opportunity to prepare for that in an intentional way that maybe we've never thought about doing before. And lastly, kind of what possibilities, whether big or more on the ground, nitty gritty, do you see for holding the power or the systems of power accountable for what you care about? Because we don't have this in-person chance, but that doesn't mean that they're not going to hear from us, and they shouldn't hear from us. So I'm going to stop here. That was fast and furious. And yes, Isabel sharing a lot of good information in the chat. A comprehension question check right now. Anything that I've said that you're like, what? Or tell me more, or anything like that.
I'm curious. So, you know, how you shape your testimony, and how, you know, everything about once you're in the door. How do we get to the door? You know, how do we lead up to that? How do we find that opportunity? Do we have to be invited? Do we have to let them know that we're going? Or how does that work in getting up to that point? I mean, I'm new to this, so.
Yeah, that's a great question, Bob. Yeah, so.
I thought it was a dumb question. So.
No.
I'm kidding.
No dumb questions here at all. When there is opportunity for in-person testifying, so in January, let's just assume that there will be. Who knows what the world will look like then, but let's assume that there will be. So when the bill, you've identified what bill you're wanting to talk about. The bill is assigned to a committee. So let's say it's a bill that's going to the Judicial Committee. That's a committee I'm familiar with. Then they will share on the legislative website, the one that I was showing earlier about where you can find senators, what day that hearing will be in which that bill will come up for opportunity to testify on it. And typically committee hearings start at either 1 or 1:30, and they, depending on how many bills are introduced in that session, there could be, I've been to hearings where there were 7 bills being talked about in one hearing, and it started at 1 or 1:30 and went past 7. And they usually put the bills that they anticipate to be a little bit more controversial later to the end, and try to get through like the more like procedural ones at the beginning. But that was something that Karina was mentioning. In order to find out like the actual schedule for those, you can email an aide. There's a Testifier's Guide to the Legislature, Nora just shared. But then when you literally, so you go to the Capitol, and the Judicial Committee, let's say in this case, always meets in room whatever number, same room. You go to that room, you walk in, there will be a table at the front that has papers where you will fill out your name, I think address, whether you support, oppose, or are speaking in neutrality about the bill, what bill you're talking about too, and you'll keep that with you. You'll also just sign in, like that you're gonna plan on speaking on X bill. Then you sit down and you get through the procedural kind of boring ones. They will then call for the testifiers for, say, LB 787. And typically then you'll go sit up in the front row, and then they'll kind of go through the supporters of that bill, then the opponents, and then the neutral testifiers. And when you go up to actually go and talk, they'll have a desk and a little mic, and you'll give that yellow paper that you put your address, name, and what bill to a page. And then you get to start talking. You introduce yourself. And in judicial, there's a 3-minute time cap, usually, depending on how many bills, but you can have as much as like 5 minutes in some committees. So and Bob, I just want to everyone, if you have interest in doing that, those kind of nitty gritties, we want to help with that. Closer to those dates, like talking through, this is exactly how it's going to go down, because what I just shared, even that process, having someone just with you who's done it before is super helpful. So just put in kind of an open invitation. If that's something that interests you and you get closer to a legislative session and you want to do that, you're like, I would really just love like a buddy to keep me like where I need to. We're super down for that.
I also think it's helpful to kind of just always be pushing out information about like the hidden rules. I think there's a lot of hidden rules in like the way that the legislature functions. So like for the first half of the session, they're referring bills to committee. And that means that they're breaking them out into like the experts that everyone has decided, like Senator so-and-so and so-and-so. This is a good mix of like 7 or 9, I forget, 9 senators, 8 senators that know about housing or like that know about urban affairs. And so those bills are all being referred to committee. And then during the first half of the session, they will do floor debate. Well, they're all gathered in the chambers starting at 9 o'clock, and they'll go from 9 to noon. And then after that, they'll start the afternoon session at 1:30. So if they're still in committee and hearing bills through that, the committee hearings will start at 1:30 in the afternoons and go till whenever they go through. So those are kind of some of like the hidden things that like people just don't talk about. And then after they decide like all of the bills that are gonna get voted out of committee or voted out of committee, then it's like morning session and afternoon session are all in the chamber. So it's really hard to understand. And that's kind of why we're like trying to push out as much information as we can. But you can pretty much count on like every day, Monday through at least Thursday, there's some sort of committee hearing happening in the afternoon in the first half of the session. So like January through early March or something like that. Bob, I think you're muted.
Sorry. So as the general public, because I mean, I live across the street from the Capitol, can I just go over there and check it out one day?
Absolutely, yeah. It's really cool how this and city council that we talked about a few weeks ago, you can just literally show up and like 1:30 in the afternoon, hang out and just listen to them talk about things that might be boring or things that might be interesting you had no idea about. I've definitely been there to talk about one bill, and then I'm like, oh, there's this other thing and like this other bill that's really compelling and something that I hadn't thought about before. And it's super, if you know, that's the thing, right? That's the problem. If you know, and if you have the information, you can just walk in 1:30, and if you see something on any of the schedules for any of the hearings, you can just pick up a sheet and get ready to testify when they call either supporters, opposition, and neutral parties.
And I want to say, I think we all are still learning best ways to navigate this. And so, yeah, it is complicated. It isn't, and we're in the business of making it accessible. And sometimes that looks different than another time. So absolutely going and checking it out. It's also weird to be navigating this in a pandemic because there are certain things that are happening that none of us have ever navigated before. None of the senators have either. So we just want to be a resource and get you and your voice heard and seen in whatever capacity you're able to. So with that, definitely if there's more follow-up questions, you can put them in the chat. You can message them directly to me via the chat or email, whatever. And I'm going to pass it to Isabel and Kat and Michelle to talk about some other exciting stuff.
Thank you so much. I'm super excited about the legislature. It's been so long, and I'm happy that at least, even if they're not having hearings, they're going to be on the floor. And I always have it open on like NET. I like to stream them on the floor talking about whatever they're talking about. I just wanted to share this really quick for Allah who had a question about how to look up bills. I think it's easiest, and this is my preference, to search by committee referral. So let's go to the judiciary, because I'm interested in the Landlord-Tenant Act and the ways that it's set up to be a little bit lopsided. So a lot of the times you'll see things in judiciary about like the legal stuff, like eliminating the death penalty, concealed weapon. And I can just search like house, maybe rent. No, this is a really bad example. Anyway, you can do this. You can search by, here, let's go up. This was really cool. We passed this in last session, so not this year, but 2019, and it went into effect in September of 2019, where a landlord has to return your security deposit within 14 days of your move out, which is like ridiculous that it wasn't there in the first place. And if they don't have an address that they try to send it to, they can't just hold on to it and be like, well, I didn't find them. It has to go to the Lost Property Division at the Secretary of State. So at the Secretary of State, you can just like put in your name or something and see like, do I have any lost property that belongs to me? Now landlords can't hold on to that money just because they're like, I couldn't find them, which was really cool. So that's just one way that it's really easy to look up things. So if you're interested in like education, you can go to the Education Committee and search through there. There's all of these different committees that are like super like building maintenance, whatever. Let's do it. Let's talk about, all of these different things. So anyway, I just wanted to show that really quick, and then I'm going to get back on track. So Kat and I are going to be talking about communication campaigns and like how to get your message across in the best way. And I'm really happy that we have Michelle here because Michelle has actually done this in the past month, which is super cool. So when we're talking about how to make your communication campaign effective, I like to think of it as like shining and sharing strategically. So shining and sharing smarter. So you really want to be in partnership. A lot of this is really hard to track on your own. You can probably put all of your effort into a few bills, by yourself, but it's so much easier when you have folks that are helping you out and friends that are have the same vision as you. So you want to collaborate on your goals and your demands. And so one thing that we did this year, last year we started the Nebraska Housing Advocacy Collaborative, which is kind of like a very informal group with a weirdly formal name. And we just got together with colleagues and folks that we know, they're passionate about housing rights. And we just got together, and in January this year, after the date of bill introduction had passed, we everyone kind of looked up everything that was passed, and we kind of collectively pulled everything together into one place on bills that were relevant to housing and housing rights in Nebraska. And we got together, we had a meeting solely on going through the bills. What does this bill mean? What is it going to do? How should we support or oppose this? Or how should we remain neutral? And so that was really helpful because folks do this because it is their full-time job. So like the Realtors Association does this every single year, and every year they have a very unified presence of what their goals are for the bills and how each one of them affects them. So we have to think, it's not something that we can do by ourselves because there's things that we can miss, perspectives that we might not know about. So really just like getting a friend or two and just starting to look through the bills and going through them is really impactful. And then you also want to talk about who and how can you leverage your power. So when we're talking about a lot of stuff in the legislature, in the hearings, folks will want to hear from the entire spectrum. The senators want to understand fully who are the people in Nebraska that are impacted by this, and what is the entire spectrum of perspectives on it. So we want to hear from folks who provide services, folks who provide cash assistance, and then folks who are directly impacted in their personal lives. The personal story really matters. And so if we know that there's a bill in committee, and we know that, for example, I'm going to go back to housing because that's my wheelhouse. If we know that folks really want to hear about how a certain law will impact landlords, then we'll want, if possible, we want to find a friendly landlord who wants to talk about it, wants to talk about their experience accepting folks who have Section 8 vouchers, and tell them their experience. You also want to make sure that you're getting a range of constituencies. So for example, not only folks that are in Lincoln and Omaha, but also folks in greater Nebraska, central and western, and all of the different parts of Nebraska, because it could be just if you don't do that, it could be framed as just a Lincoln and Omaha issue, which kind of gets back to Karina's point about, well, should this really be up to the state or should we just do it locally? So leveraging your power and being strategic and making sure that you have a diversity of perspectives, and making sure that your perspectives are coming from different places is really valuable. I think that's something that we were able to do really successfully with the housing advocacy group, because we got folks who were, we have partners that we work with at Legal Aid of Nebraska, for example, and we work really closely with the folks that are here in Lincoln and Omaha, and they were like, what if we had our lawyer in North Platte come and give testimony about what he's seeing over there, so that it matters and it's relevant. We're showing that it's an issue, not just in Lincoln and Omaha, but in North Platte and other parts of Nebraska. So yeah, all of that collaboration and all of that delegation of strategy is super, super important. And I wanted to shift a little bit, and then I'll hand it over to Kat and Michelle. But we are living in COVID times. We don't have the same ability to gather with folks in shared spaces and have that face-to-face interaction. One thing that we've been able to do at South of Downtown is to really maximize the use of our shared environment. So in South of Downtown, there's a lot of apartment buildings and not a lot of yards or backyards, and the porches are super valuable, but even our sheer lived and built environment is not lending itself to that instant connection that you might get with a neighbor if you're like grilling on your patio or something. It's a different dynamic. So we were thinking about how can we use our environment to be in dialogue. And we thought, oh, people are walking. People are taking lots of walks. We're all bored, and we want to be outside. And so Kat and our other colleague, Christy, at South of Downtown, we've been really great at using the right-of-way, so the space between the curb and the sidewalk, and the sidewalks themselves as ways to get a message across. Because that's where people are walking, that's where people are existing, whether it's not at the same time, but it's in the same space. So using a lot of yard signs and then chalk paint has been really effective to get a message across about racial justice and the Black Lives Matter movement, and then also about voting and the census. And we have to be very, very intentional here about our words, because we know that people are just gonna pass it by. And we want to make sure that that split second that they're looking at it is making the most impact for them. And so we have to think of, like, what is our intent of our message? Is our intent to get folks to fill out the census? Well, we should definitely have the website on there in an easy to read format, and then make something eye-catching. Make it so that use a statistic that's shocking. So, like, for every person that doesn't fill out the census in their community, that's potentially up to $30,000 of federal funding that your community won't get, which is incredible. And it's staggering. So that was one thing that was being put out on the sidewalks and in the yard signs, was that statistic, because you want to make sure that your community is thriving. And if you could do one thing to fill out the census in less than 5 minutes, making that as important of an impact as possible in that glance that folks are just gonna, that people are in, which people are passing by your message, is really important. So I want to turn it over to Michelle and Kat to talk about their, what Michelle has done. So I'm gonna stop sharing. Is that what you want me to do? Okay.
Yeah, I can start sharing. So just kind of playing off of what Isabel was saying. So I'm going to try and go full. Actually, I'm not going to. Yeah, I'm going to try and go full screen. No, I'm not. I'm going to leave it. Okay. So yard signs, they are really basic, right? Anyone can make a yard sign or buy a yard sign. And so we made like over 100, both for the BLM in response to that, in response to police violence and just racial injustice in our community. We worked with the UNL Social Practice Coalition to build a bunch of unique yard signs. And this was really amazing. And I just wanted to show you, like, the power of a simple message in your yard. The Lincoln Journal-Star actually wrote an article about a family who had a yard sign that our organizer, Christy Yang, had made, and they had it in their yard. And a neighbor came up to their yard sign and put a note that said, like, the Black Lives Matter is a problematic movement. It's offensive to have this in your yard. Please take it down. So they shared this on their social media, and the other neighbors started putting up signs in responses to the note, and they were like, no, we're going to add more signs because we're trying to create dialogue. And then they posted this in the Journal-Star. So at this point, the whole neighborhood is having a conversation about this movement. And then beyond that, now our whole city, because of this article, is having a conversation about this movement. And it all started with a yard sign that our organizer made. And so making things easy and fun and accessible, that's kind of, as an artist, those are all things I value. And also, I think it's ways to get people engaged that maybe wouldn't normally think of advocacy or writing a city council member as something that they either have time for or even want to do, even though maybe they care. And so what Michelle did was she created a campaign, a letter writing campaign that she was popping up in her yard. And we're friends and we also collaborate on different things. And she was like, hey, I would love for you to come to this. And I was like, cool, I'll bring my yard signs. We'll bring some like art supplies. And she had like a little sticker set up so that we could write to state senators and then also have this opportunity to do something kind of fun. So whether you're there for the letter writing or maybe you just wanted a free sign, like there's these different people coming from these different areas to do that. Michelle, do you want to talk a little bit about what went into putting on the pop-up letter writing campaign?
Yeah, so pretty much I had just been writing a bunch of emails to the mayor and to city council and police department and just a bunch of people. And I just was writing a crap load of emails each day and was trying to spread some of that information to my friends. Just like, hey, you should go write an email as well. And I found myself like forwarding a lot of the emails I wrote to other people so that they could kind of use some of the statistics that I had in there or just get inspiration from it. And then I decided, why not try to get other people who I don't know? I live on 14th Street and I have, you know, one of those yards that is like 3 feet long. So when I'm sitting at my kitchen table, my kitchen is all windows. It's like being in a fishbowl and like I watch my neighbors and they watch me. And so I just decided like, I always see tons and tons of people walking past my house. I should just try to stop them. So we put up a table and just had envelopes and stamps. And then I had one of my friends print out the information that I had kind of gathered up and put into some just, you know, Google documents so that, and we also printed it into binders so that people could either be stopping and looking at the table or grabbing a binder and looking at it and then just talking through like, what are you interested in? What do you want to write about? And just making sure that people felt comfortable like with the basic knowledge of it. And then otherwise it was just people individually writing their letters. And then we took it over to Kat's house and did the same thing a week later. And the goal is next week to do it again over on like 33rd and South or Van Dorn kind of area. And I don't know, I guess my hope is just that it can kind of keep spreading and people can also understand that even if you don't like have a lot of time to get invested in this, usually you can still be impactful. Like I'm a teacher and I think of most of the time like what my role in like activism is through my teaching. But this was like a really like easy way to be able to do it. And I just am hoping that it's going to kind of keep spreading to other people.
Yes. So some different things I wanted to highlight about the way that our pop-up, it's like, it was Michelle's thing, but then we all kind of started just like owning it and it's like traveling to different people's houses.
It's a joint thing. Yeah, it's the traveling letter writing.
Yeah, it's really beautiful in that way. So making it easy for yourself if you want to organize a pop-up letter writing campaign and also making it easy for people that are going by. So like Michelle said, her house is on a really busy street already. So finding a location where people can see it and people are already there. So go where people are, I think is useful. I also, making it safe is something I should have added for COVID. Like we had masks at our second letter writing campaign where you could just, if you didn't have one, you could use one. We had hand sanitizer at both and everyone at the first one was pretty much wearing a mask anyways. But collaborating with like a nonprofit or a friend if you need access to some of those resources. So just making sure people feel comfortable. I also think promotion is important with how these pop-up letter writing campaigns are happening because of COVID. So we didn't like make an event on Facebook. We didn't over promote it because we didn't want too many people coming. So the focus of the pop-up letter writing campaign is to do it for your neighborhood, for the people on your block that are already walking around. So it's not a lot of work in that way. It's easy because you don't have to like make a flyer or something. I think we just circulated like a story that Michelle had made on Instagram. That was like one of the few ways that we promoted. And then we had signs like on the corners. And then we talked already about like making it fun for people to participate, having something sort of free or extracurricular in addition to the letters, so that they maybe come for one reason and then end up doing that thing, or they come to write a letter and maybe they get a yard sign and start dialogue in that new way as well. This is something. Yes, go ahead. Yeah.
Oh, but just real quick, I'm going to put in the chat the link to the document or the folder that I've got in my Google Drive with the letter writing information. Some of it needs to be updated because we know now that the mayor did go ahead and accept the grant for the police officers. So people might just write to that to let her know that they are maybe disgruntled. But please feel free to like use that or share it out if it's of any use to you.
Yes. Yeah, that was probably one of the most, that's like the most vital part of the pop-up letter writing campaign, because you could do a campaign on anything. We wanted to do one on in support of BLM because that's what I am and we're still passionate about. But you could do this on housing. You could do it on LGBTQ plus rights. You could do it on whatever you care about. And the foundational material you really need is like a summary of the bills so that people can sort of see at a glance, or at least with some specificity, what the bill they're writing in response to is. And that was the very heavy work that Michelle did and the ACLU did. Thank you, ACLU. So that's important. And then the last thing that I kind of wanted to highlight is being effective. So making it fun, making it easy, and making it effective. Part of making it effective, especially in my neighborhood where we have low voter registration, is if you already have people there writing to their senators, get them registered to vote. So I registered like one person to vote. I had some soft training, but at the next booth, we want to bring in like Christy or some different organizers to help register people to vote. We'd have folks that would walk by and be like, well, I'd love to write, but I'm not registered to vote. So like, I don't think my opinion really counts, or I have a felony, so I don't think that it counts. And so just getting people up to date, like after two years after your felony, you can vote. And there's just some different stipulations. To have an expert on that is really useful, and to help people see like their vote matters and also their voice matters in the state Senate. So yeah, that's kind of what we have. And also, if anyone wants to borrow our pop-up BLM letter writing situation, let us know. Yes.
Thanks so much, Kat and Michelle and Isabel. That I think is, speaks a lot to if you're hesitant about testifying in person at the legislature, or, it's just like a really good way to get your foot in the door, to get comfortable, and just another really effective way to share your message with our elected officials so they know how things are affecting you, your neighbors, your community. So that's really important to consider. So we're over time just a little bit. I want to thank all of you so much for coming and joining us today. We're all around. Email us if you have more questions. I will send a follow-up message to everyone who registered with all of the slides from today's presentation and any other resources that might be helpful. And if you have any questions at all, feel free to reach out to me or any of our CIL team members. I will drop a couple of links into the chat here. So that's our webpage where you can kind of follow us and see what we're up to. We also have a Facebook group right here, and you can request to join that group. And so we post all sorts of stuff in there, events, and I'll share this recording when we get it uploaded as well, and you can share this out with other folks who maybe couldn't join us today. So thank you everyone for joining us, and feel free to follow up if you have any other questions. Have a great rest of your weekend.
Thanks, everyone.